So hello again, everyone. Welcome to the second in the two lecture series for today, April 29, 2020. Fasten your seatbelts because this platform is moving from Nigeria to Kalamazoo in the US. I think it's about 10 minutes past 6 a.m. In Kalamazoo, and I now have the pleasure of introducing to you our facilitator, our second facilitator for today's series of lectures. So, who is our facilitator? He's Professor William W. Cobern, who holds the position of Distinguished University Faculty Scholar at the Marlinson Institute for Science Education, College of Arts and Sciences, Western Michigan University. He began his science education career as a high school biology and chemistry teacher. At the Institute, he teaches a variety of courses for science teacher development and science education research. He has had active research programs funded by the National Science Foundation regarding factors that influence effective science teaching and learning. His current research efforts have to do with the relationship of trust in scientific knowledge and student understanding of the nature of science. He has been a guest lecturer in Australia, Brazil, Egypt, Germany, Japan, Lebanon, Malawi, New Zealand, Norway, Sweden, South Africa, Taiwan, and Turkey. He's a fellow of the American Association for the Advancement of Science, a fellow of the American Scientific Affiliation, and a fellow of the American Educational Research Association. Now let's welcome Professor William Bill Cobern. Bill, I'm wondering why you didn't mention your sojourn in Nigeria. He was a staff in Sokoto, University of Sokoto at some point, several years ago. So, Bill, you have.
I suppose I should have mentioned that, given the venue for this morning, but that was a long time ago.
All right. So, Bill, you have the floor.
Okay. Well, good morning, everybody. I am not the most technologically adept person, although I have been using Zoom the past few weeks more than I ever imagined, because we're under self-quarantine here, and so I have to work with all of my students through Zoom. But as Peter mentioned, and I think Peter said before, he and I have known each other for probably more years than we'd like to admit to. I've got a lot more gray hair than he has, though. So, and I think I'm a few years older. You know, I had my 71st birthday this year, so it's amazing. And when I was in Sokoto, Nigeria, that was 1979. Seems like another life ago. So anyway, as Peter said in the introduction, he asked me to talk about what we're doing in research. And over the years, I've had a number of research interests, but mostly they have revolved around effective instruction, have revolved around social and cultural influences on teaching and learning, and also on the philosophy and nature of science. Actually, the very first paper I ever published was in the Journal of Research and Science Teaching, JARST, and it was from published some data that I collected in Sokoto so many years ago, and it was a Nature of Science type of paper. All right, so I am going to attempt to share a screen. All right, so hold on to see how this works. So let's see if I can get this PowerPoint to go. All right, does everybody see that? the
Yeah,
introductory slide?
very clearly so. Yeah, we can see the butterfly there.
Thank heavens for small successes. So, all right. So here we go. Now, as you can see, the title of this research, and these PowerPoint slides come from a presentation that one of my former students and colleagues did at the National Association for Research in Science Teaching a year ago. We're getting ready to submit this paper for publication. So if anybody wants to see a draft copy, you can send me an email, and I will send it to you. But as you can see, the title is Investigating the Potential for Unanticipated Consequences of Teaching the Tentative Nature of Science. And so what I'm going to talk about is an ongoing research project, something that's going on right now. We have some findings, but this is an area that we think has not been examined before, but needs to be looked at. And when we think about the current crisis with the coronavirus, the issue of trust in science becomes quite salient. And I think it's my very last slide this morning. It's going to come back to some recent survey work in the U.S. having to do with trust and the virus. So anyway, let's go. So we were thinking for a long time about the public reception of evolution, and we know that evolution for many people can be controversial. We also know that there's a great deal of interest about climate change. We're very concerned about what's happening with the climate, but we also know that there is skepticism about climate change, and of course, when I say things like there's skepticism about climate change, I'm thinking about my own environment, but I also know that the attitudes in the United States are not necessarily unique. I know that there are other places in the world that where the public has difficulties with evolution, and my guess is that climate change issues are not always accepted by everyone in the public. But at least here in the U.S., we tend to see media articles that talk about evolution or climate change as settled science. I don't know if does my mouse work come across on the screen?
Yeah, it's okay. It's doing okay. It's doing okay.
Yeah. Okay, thank you. So this phrase, these two words, settled science, I don't know if you see something like that in other newspapers around the world, but that's something you would see here in the U.S. If there was some discussion about climate change or evolution. Media reports would oftentimes say, "Oh, this is settled science." However, if you look at the reports that come from people who question evolution, and then of course now more recently people who question the veracity of climate change science, one of the things that gets said is that, oh, these are just theories. They're just theories. And when somebody says that in opposition to something like climate change science, what they're saying is that this really isn't proved. This is just a hypothesis that that some scientists have. In other words, they use the phrase "just theories." It's evolution. Oh, that's just a theory. They use it as a way of casting doubt on the veracity of the theory. Same with climate change, right? So I put up some text here. Some people will criticize these ideas by saying that they are just theories. They're not necessarily. these are not necessarily accurate knowledge. They're not necessarily something to be trusted. Obviously, people in the science community think that's a problem. So, if we go back to the idea of the nature of science, go back to my title. Oh, there it is. We're talking about the nature of science, and I'm assuming that this phrase "nature of science" is familiar to everybody that's in the class. But briefly, it's an idea that comes out of the philosophy of science, or even the philosophy of knowledge, that has to do with what scientific knowledge is actually like. And in the science education community, for a good 20, 30 years, there has been a strong push to teach students in the schools about not just scientific knowledge. For example, not just teaching them what photosynthesis is, but teaching them about the nature of science. And so, sticking with photosynthesis, where does that idea come from? How does a scientist arrive at such knowledge? And across the science education community, and I think at least in Nigeria, where I know of quite a few science educators, I think there's a shared understanding of what the nature of science is, and this gets spelled out in a set of statements you might see. And I have put 3 of these statements on the screen. I'm going to go through all of them briefly. Now you'll notice that my list starts with a B. So maybe you're saying, hey, where's the A? Okay, well, I'm actually going to come to the A last. So, but just briefly to go through these, that when we talk about teaching the nature of science in the science education community, these are the things that we're talking about. We're talking about teaching that science is based on observations, and observations and inferences from observations. We're talking about science aiming to be objective, and yet a certain amount of subjectivity is unavoidable. We say that scientific knowledge is created from human imagination. It's logical, but it is a creative process. We also say that science is part of social and cultural traditions. Science is a human endeavor. It's embedded in society. It's embedded in culture, and because of that, it can escape cultural and social influence. F, both scientific laws and theories are subject to change. Make sure G, there's no universal step-by-step scientific method. It used to be that the first chapter of the science textbook was the chapter on the scientific method, at least for our textbooks. That ended quite some time ago, because there's a general realization that scientists use many different approaches and not necessarily a 5-step method. All right, so when science educators talk about the nature of science, that is the kind of thing that they're talking about. But they're talking about one more, and this is the one that I want to focus on. If you do a Google search about science education and the nature of science, one of the things that you will come up most frequently is this idea that scientific knowledge is tentative. Now, typically what we say is that it's both tentative and durable, right? It's both tentative and durable, but what you frequently see is just scientific knowledge is tentative. In fact, I was going over some papers by some pretty important science education researchers, And I noticed in one of them, in a review of these bullet points on the nature of science, this last one, which is actually the first one, first, was labeled the tentative nature of science. So its label was the tentative nature of science, followed by scientific knowledge is both tentative and durable. Well, my point is simply that even in this professional paper, the emphasis was clearly on the tentative nature of science and not so much the durable nature of science. Now, I'm going to come back to that word durable a little later because it is a pretty problematic word, even though it is found frequently in the science education literature. Okay, so I'm back to this this slide. All right, we have evolution. We have things like climate change. You know, there are other controversial things that could stick in here. We could put in things about vaccinations and other sorts of stuff. But right now, for these purposes, I picked the areas that have, for the longest time, and I think perhaps the loudest dissent. So, where might people get these ideas that science is just a theory, right? Where might people get these kinds of ideas? And we have asked ourselves, is it possible that we as science educators are not faultless? Okay? In other words, when we look at this and we realize that some people use this as a way of dissenting from evolution and climate change, all right, as well as other things, right? When we realize that people say something like science is just, or evolution is just a theory, climate change science, that's just theoretical, where do they get that? We start asking, wait a minute, are we as science educators faultless in this? Do we have any responsibility in terms of this misunderstanding of scientific knowledge? Well, there was an interesting editorial a couple of years ago in the science magazine Nature, and I'm sure you recognize Nature. Nature is one of the world's premier journals in science, and the editor had this to say. Now, I'll give you a moment to read the text. Okay. Now, the editor of Science is he's being very, very clear. And now, I've highlighted some of the text. What you see in the green color, that's my emphasis. It's not in the original. But that editor is pointing out this concern that we came up with, that wait a minute, are we possibly encouraging too much doubt by the way we teach the nature of science? And then the editor makes this bold comment: not all science is tentative. Now, if you spend much time around professional science educators, science education researchers, especially those who deal in the nature of science, they're going to be pulling their hair out over this statement, because that flies in the face of what is considered the principal feature of science, which is that it is tentative. But here we have it. Here we have this editor in a world-class science journal saying, wait a minute, maybe we're encouraging too much doubt. And wait a minute, don't you realize that not all science is tentative? Now, of course, they are thinking of tentative a little bit differently, but nevertheless, the contrast is jarring. So, teaching the tentative nature of science is an important element of science education. I think that if we look at science historically, If we look at philosophy and the problems of induction, it doesn't take too long to realize that you can't really prove things. You can sometimes prove things false, but it is virtually impossible to have absolute proof. And to be honest, we have to conclude that it's always possible that we'll learn something new that will change something that we know today. But the point is that we realize, at least our point is that we realize that it is a reasonable conclusion, all right, that if we teach the tentative nature of science, right, that some people will decide that evolution, climate change, and so forth, they will say, well, yes, exactly right, it's tentative. Or in other words, we are back to the idea of it is just a theory. All right? So that was our concern opening up this avenue of research a couple of years ago. We began to be concerned that, wait a minute, when we teach the nature of science, maybe we are actually undermining confidence in science, or at least certain areas. And if you look at the science literature, there appears to be some scientists who agree to that we are doing this. And if you look in the public and you see the arguments such as, oh, this is just a theory, and you start connecting dots, you've got to suspect that maybe an emphasis on the tentative nature of science has a negative as well as positive effects. Okay. So, to what extent, we ask, to what extent does focusing on the tentative nature of science inadvertently undermine confidence in science? That's what we want to know. So, bearing in mind this just a theory argument, we considered that students who oppose or who are uncomfortable with controversial science concepts might bolster their doubts by turning to the inherently tentative nature of science. That's where we started into our empirical work with this idea. So in other words, what we're doing is that we're taking these philosophical and theoretical, perhaps even social arguments and saying, all right, maybe these things are so, maybe they're not, but if we're going to investigate this empirically, how might we do this? And this is where we started. We started with this idea that, well, maybe if students are opposed or uncomfortable with certain controversial items, that they will adopt the just theory explanation. They will have their doubts supported by the inherent tentative nature of science. That's what we wanted to know more about. So we began a set of exploratory empirical
Bill,
studies.
you have 15 more minutes.
Oh, okay, then I better get going.
Yeah.
No, I always talk longer than I think I'm going to. All right, so we don't need to get into this. We had 500 or more students involved, and we tested these two hypotheses. The first one is that about students having confidence in, and I got to get this down so I can read it. Okay. Students have confidence in the veracity of scientific knowledge, even if they have doubts about some areas such as evolution or climate change. Students with less confident about these controversial areas are more likely to have doubt, more likely to support the tentative nature of science. So this is just two deductions from our theoretical reasoning. And we set up a design where we picked two uncontroversial and two controversial statements. And the uncontroversial statements of scientific laws, this is based on our own experience, had to do with Newton's first law. And we're working with university students, by the way, first year pre-service teachers. And we figured, okay, they all know Newton's first law. And we created a second a second item that had to do with heart-lung function. We figured, oh, everybody knows that the heart pumps blood to the lungs, and the lungs pick up oxygen. We know that. But then we had two controversial statements, and we had one about human evolution and one about anthropomorphic climate change. And then we used the statement about the nature of science as durable yet tentative, because that's how the statement appears so much in the literature. And this is an example of how the items were set up. These are Likert scale items. And I don't have enough time to explain why we use this format, but according to the science community, an object stays at rest, blah, 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 so forth and so on. That's our non-controversial. We figure they all should know that, and they shouldn't have any problems with it. All right. The nature of science item had to do with, again, the combination of science being tentative and durable. However, in 2017, we ran a replication study. Now, this was a conceptual replication, because what we wanted to do in the replication was change a couple of the questions a little bit. And in the 2015 study, we wanted students to see the statement about the tentative and durable nature of science the way it's often printed in the literature. But in the 2017 follow-up study, we decided we wanted to break out those two words into two statements. And so the 2017 data collection effort had two nature of science questions instead of one. And the first one had to do with science being accurate and can be trusted, because we argued that that's what durable means.
Yep.
If scientific knowledge is durable, then it means it's accurate and you can trust it,
sure.
Right? But the second part of it is that it can change in light of new evidence. So we put both of these questions in. Oh, and by the way, all of these questions had a space for students to make comments.
Okay.
And the comments became very important later. As I say here, we had quantitative data, and we explored those with simple statistics. These questions were not asked in a single sitting. We asked them over a period of 3 weeks, but I don't have time to explain that arrangement, but it was important to us. So in terms of hypothesis one, what did our data come out showing? Right. Well, here it is. Okay, just a second, sorry. It's hard for me to see the entire screen because I have faces in front of it, but I'll do the best here. So here is the just means from the data collection, and the left-hand column is just shorthand for the item. So the motion item is the Newton's first law. The heart item is just the heart-lung function item. The evolution item is the human evolution, and the warming item has to do with climate change. And you can see the years in which they asked them. I'm gonna, as you can see, the motion item, the means are large. This is a 5-point Likert scale with 5 being strongly agreed. So just as we expected in both years, most of the students agree that the statement of motion is correct, right? Hardly anybody disagreed with that. Now, the one on the heart became a problem because that is much lower than we expected. And I won't get into this except to say that we realized that this is a weakness in our students, all right? So this is a case where scientific knowledge that we thought our students should know turned out to be something that they weren't that quite familiar with. So that item did not work as well as we wanted. Now, then there's the evolution item. Now, we actually were quite pleased with these means. We're here in Kalamazoo, as Peter mentioned earlier, and Kalamazoo is a relatively, well, Michigan is a mixed state. You know, Michigan is not real liberal, it's not real conservative, it's not real secular, it's not real religious. It's kind of it's typical Midwest. It's the middle of American society. But where we are in the Southwest area is a more conservative area as opposed to the Southeast area where Detroit is at. And we anticipated lower scores, lower means on the human evolution item, but it didn't happen. In both 2015 and in 2017, the means were relatively high. Climate change was more of what we expected. We were curious, though, that in the 2 years between the taking of the data, the means increased significantly. And there's a reason why we waited 2 years, but again, I have to explain that another time. So we were pleased that in the 2 years that the means had gone up. We think that's probably the increasing attention in the media to climate change that would accounts for that.
5 minutes more. 5 more minutes, Bill.
Okay, now let's go. Well, I'm going to finish up here real fast.
Sure.
So now let's go to Science Can Change. If you look in the 2017 data, look at the figure, 4.73 on a 5-point scale. Very strong approval of the statement that science can change. Okay, so in this slide, what I've done is I pulled these four out separately to focus on them. So you see, science can change over a 4.7 mean on that. Right? And remember, this is when we removed the word durable from the question. Now, in 2017, when we asked separately, is science accurate and can be trusted? Look at the mean. Look at that, 3.37 on a 5-point scale. That is not even half. That's just. Well, it's not in the strongly agree. It's barely into the agree. You get 4.73 on science can change, but when you break out and ask it about accuracy and trust and whether it can be trusted, you drop to 3.37. Right. That came as a shock to us. Now, we thought, well, all right, what if we take the students, separate out the students who have low confidence and high confidence in evolution? So that, there you have, you can see what happens. The means for science that for science is durable and can change. Oh my goodness, I'm having trouble here with my screen. All right, so I cannot see the numbers in front of me because
it's 4.25 for the durable but can change, and I can read it for you. Yeah, I can read it for you.
You can read it. So look at the means between those two.
Sure,
and now look at these. Right. The difference in these. I'll go back again. Those means, and these are the low confidence and the high confidence in evolution. So what you're seeing then, and now here is the science accuracy and trustworthy. Look at the 2.89 figure. So clearly the students who gave evolution who expressed very low confidence in evolution also expressed low confidence in the trust and accuracy of science. What's troublesome is that this one right here, you're asking the high confidence students, in other words, these are the students who have high confidence in evolution, you're asking them about science accuracy and trustworthiness, but look at the mean. Look at the mean. It's 3.44. It's not that strong. So that came as a significant shock to us. It is not what we expected. We did not find what we initially expected to find, which is a correlation between a strong view on the tentative nature of science and a weak view on the controversial statements. We did not find that kind of inverse proportion ratio. What we find was this pervasive weakness in trust in science, even if students had confidence in controversial items. So here we go. It appears that most students with high confidence in the tentative, changeable nature of scientific knowledge. I mean, most of our students have learned this lesson, that scientific knowledge is tentative by nature. It does not seem to have an inverse correlation with confidence in controversial items. That's what I was saying a moment ago. However, the bad news is that students' confidence in the accuracy or trustworthiness of scientific knowledge is lower than expected, irrespective of their confidence in evolution and climate change. We found much lower level of confidence and accuracy and trustworthy. And then when durability is expressed as accurate and can be trusted, and this concept is separated from the tentative nature of science, then the confidence and trustworthiness of scientific knowledge drops across the board. It goes way down. So where are we going with that? Well, we are still analyzing the qualitative data, but actually I can tell you as of this morning, I have looked at all the qualitative data, and it tracks with the quantitative data. Most of the students rarely make comments about trustworthiness of science or accuracy. If they're going to comment, they comment on the tentative nature of science. We also realize that the word durable is probably problematic. In other words, we began to think, gee, maybe students have a different understanding. And in fact, since collecting this data, we've also collected data on how students understand the word durable, as in the durable nature of science. And that data is all over the place. It hardly tells us anything. All right, so is this of any importance at all? Well, here's something that came out just in the last week or so, and I'm going to close here. There is a note again in Nature magazine reporting a survey study that has just come out, and these researchers found that trust in science, get that, trust in science was the most important predictor of compliance with public health recommendations for limiting the viral spread. So yes, I think it is important, and I think we have enough data, at least for our students, to suggest that we need to go back and revisit how we're teaching the tentative nature of science, because it does appear that to some extent we are undercutting confidence in science. Thank you.
Wonderful. Thank you so very
How
much.
did I do?
Oh, yeah, this is awesome. Thank you so very much, Professor Bill Cobern, for that wonderful lecture, which we thoroughly enjoyed. We have about 10 minutes, and I will open the floor for comments or questions. But before that, Bill, I'd like to make, in about a minute, my views known. First, I applaud the thrust of your research. It is very apt, and the methodology is quite elegant and dependable. And the results are quite interesting for me. I'm looking at a situation where you take this freshmen in your university or around as neophytes. I'm using the word not in a pejorative sense, that they are just like kids on the block. What do they know about science? It itself. So if I were to ask you or recommend to you future work, I will ask that you ask the scientists on your campus, those that are practicing science, give them this kind of questionnaire and let us see how we compare the views of the experts with those, in quotes now, of the novice. That would be quite an interesting thing. And it would be nice to go and talk to Donald Trump about this thing. I mean, also survey Donald Trump, to find out. That's by way of a joke anyway. So what I'm suggesting is that, Bill, this is quite nice. I mean, you have defined your framework for sampling, which is what you've received your National Science Foundation grant for. But I think if I were doing this study, I will go along that path, but also include the views of those who are practicing hard science. Now, I'm just bemused if you like, about the editor of Nature, who said that not all science is tentative. Well, that's interesting. I hold an opposite view, by the way, but that's my view. Yeah, so I throw open this to our students first. Like I said, yeah, we have 10 minutes, and then I'm going to ask the president of the Nigerian Academy of Science to be the first to lead from the facilitator side. So let's have any of our students wading into this discussion by way of questions or comments. Aladioke, please make it brief. Yes, Aladioke, you have the floor.
Thank you, sir. I want to say kudos to our professor for wonderful lecture this morning. My comment has to do with the nature of science. As we all know that science is exploratory. What happens in most of our schools is that our teachers teach products of science, which is contradictory. So I believe that there is need for us to go back to the drawing table to look at the curriculum for teacher education.
Correct.
Especially science. That will help in a lot of ways. So, looking at science, curiosity, and motivation, is there any relationship?
Okay. Yeah.
And exploratory nature of science. Thank you, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. Yes, any other person who is hoping to take the floor? Kunle, yes, take the floor.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you, Professor Williams, for the lecture. I want to recall the words of Professor Wolabi in one of our deliberations some days back, last week to say. He said that science is about the community and the environment. I think while we are having the issue of low expectations in that around confidence, is that we make, particularly in Africa, we make science to deviate away from what our students or the learners see around the environment. If we make them to discover the learning, then their confidence will be more higher. For example, if a young child is made to touch an alt object, the next time the child is not going there to touch it because he has discovered himself that this thing is alt and can harm him. So if we make our students to see the connection between science in the classroom and the environment and the community, perhaps the confidence in the theories of science will be more on the high side. Thank you.
Wonderful. Yeah. Please recall, thank you very much, Kule. Recall that we're talking about trust and confidence that people have either in the tentative nature of science or in the fact that it is durable. Just steer your conclusion, your discussions around that. Is it tentative? Is that the pervasive, or that is durable? That's it. You see, what Professor Bill Cobern has done is to share the results of his study, leading his students with us. So he is letting us know about this very exciting, and I tell you, I feel very, very delighted about what I can see happening, at least within the sample that he surveyed. So let me take one more, and then I will go on to ask Professor Mosto Onuoha. Okay, I can't see anybody yet. I can see our Professor S.P.T. Bamanja. You are wonderful. Oh, sorry. 1 minute, I'm losing. Yeah, so we'll be delighted to have the view of our president of the Nigerian Academy of Science. That's the That's the ultimate.
Yeah.
You have the floor, sir.
First of all, I'd like to thank Bill for sharing with us the results from the study in his school. It's quite interesting. And the topic itself is going to keep resounding for quite a long time to come. Whether what people decide to believe. For example, some of us today are waging war against what we call pseudoscience. And because there's so much pseudoscience, so the reliability and we begin to doubt even whether how permanent are the things we say we have found. If we take the COVID-19, for example, as a typical case, the pseudoscience, for example, the pseudoscientists there are many. Cow urine, bleach, even cocaine, every kind of thing has been proposed as something that can help people. And then all sorts of people, alternative medicine producers and wellness experts are pushing pills and so on that are supposed to use the immune system. Everything is on sale. And a lot of that, the only way to counter that is by hard facts, more science. And a lot of science is also coming out and are being used to debunk many of these, which are not based on facts. So as regards, I think we can trust science reasonably well. We do improve on things we know. We do get better as time goes on with things. We move further and further. But I think I agree with some of the results, but like the Facilitator General said, I think the views of young people who are just fresh in universities and so on, we cannot use that to generalize a lot. We have to know the views of them. Even we who are practitioners over the decades, we know that even some of us, what we propose, sometimes we revise ourselves, we fine tune, but when the facts are available, they stay. They can only get better, but not upturned.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you so
That's
very
all
much.
I can say for now.
Oh, wonderful. Thank you so very much. At the end of it, just to let people know that we're going to ask Professor Mosto Onuoha, who is President of Nigeria Academy of Science, to make the presentation of the plaque on our behalf. So who else? Yeah, I think I just yield to Bill to just summarize, address a few questions that have been raised in post to your presentation. Over to you, Bill.
There, I had to unmute myself. So, yeah, I didn't catch the first question, but I know that somebody talked about localizing, science. He's certainly correct. To the extent that we can teach science, so that we are bringing in the environment that is around students, the better that students will learn science. It's just that as students go through school and as they get into the secondary level and into the colleges and universities, we begin to teach them the more sophisticated things, such as epistemology. That is, all right, we can talk about why a flower or why plants are green, at least green plants, why they're green, but that knowledge has a nature, and that nature has to do with how the knowledge is developed and how it can change and the kind of the evidence, the warrants that we have for the knowledge. We begin to teach those things to students. So regardless of how well we do in younger grades, we may do a fabulous job teaching science. It still remains that as we move into these epistemological issues, the data that we have, and this certainly is preliminary data, and it's from one university, so I'm not generalizing. I'm just simply saying this data indicates that we need to be careful about how we treat this concept of the tentative nature of science. When I'm working with students, I frequently use a phrase that comes from the American law courts. In law, a jury will oftentimes be asked to say whether a person is proved guilty, not stop there, but proved guilty beyond a reasonable doubt. And that last phrase is critical, beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think that in teaching the nature of science, that's the kind of phrase that we need to begin to use. That, yes, in scientific knowledge, all knowledge is inherently tentative, but there is a point when you can have sufficient evidence to say that, wait a minute, for all practical purposes, for all reasonable people, this is settled. This is settled.
Yeah, that's very good. Thank you so very much.
You're welcome.
Again, Bill. After this, you can go and take your sleep, much and sleep. I suspect it's like
no, I'm awake now.
No, sleep again, my friend. And I'm sure it's 7 a.m. at your end. So let me now have the pleasure of inviting Professor Mosto Onuoha to make this presentation on behalf of us all the students from several African countries, and the leaders of science education or STEM education in Africa, present this to you. Professor Mosto Onuoha, you have the floor, sir.
All right, this is an appreciation plaque. It says appreciation. Lagos State University, Africa Center of Excellence for Innovative and Transformative STEM Education, World Bank supported project. This is to certify that Professor William W. Cobern facilitated courses ACE 813 and ACE 913, 27 to April to May 2020. This plaque is signed by the director, Professor Peter Okebukola, whoever.
Thank you so very much, Professor Mosto Onuoha. And on that note, we would like to bring this session to a close, but not without a round of applause that will ring from Lagos to Kalamazoo. Let me unmute you all so that you will all, clap and appreciate.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, Bill.
Professor Briggs, I hope you are keeping safe.
Yeah, that is good. That is good.
Okay.
That's very good.
All right.
Yes.
I was reading it, Professor Babanja. Can you hear me?
Oh yes, loud and clear, sir. Loud and clear.